In Monday's red and blue political roundup, with voters heading to the polls in just a few weeks, the president is weighing in on an important issue, election interference. President Trump sat down for a wide-ranging interview with 60 Minutes Sunday. Leslie Stahl asked him about Russian President Vladimir Putin. While the president admitted the Kremlin meddled in U.S. elections, he added another country might have as well.
You agree that Vladimir Putin is involved in assassinations, in poisonings?
Probably he is, yeah, probably. I mean, I don't... Probably, but I rely on them. It's not in our country.
Okay, why not? They shouldn't do it. This is a terrible thing.
Of course they shouldn't do it. Okay, that's the only collusion.
Do you believe that the Russians interfered in the 2016 campaign, election?
Well, they meddled, but I think China meddled too.
He went on to add, quote, frankly, China is a bigger problem. Joining me now from Washington is Niall Stanage. She's a White House columnist for The Hill. Niall, thanks for joining us. With the midterms around the corner, what's going to be the bigger issue here? Election interference or the countries the president was talking about?
Well, I mean, election interference is clearly an issue. It is clearly something that, on one hand, Donald Trump fears is used to dismiss or underplay his election win, and that's why I think he reacts in the way that he does. But foreign policy more generally is obviously the grander issue. And if we want to talk about China, things like the trade war and so forth are clearly going to be issues not just in the midterms, but beyond them.
Well, the president also spoke about the Mueller investigation. Let's listen to some of that.
Will you pledge that you will not shut down the Mueller investigation?
Well, I don't pledge anything, but I will tell you, I have no intention of doing that. I think it's a very unfair investigation because there was no collusion of any kind.
But you won't pledge?
There is no collusion. I don't want to pledge. Why should I pledge to you? If I pledge, I'll pledge. I don't have to pledge to you, but I have no intention of doing it.
So candidates on both sides of the aisle have not been saying much about the Russia probe ahead of the midterms. Is that by design?
Well, I think that it is to the extent that they want to talk about other issues. I mean, for most politicians, whichever office they're seeking, issues like the economy, jobs, those kind of kitchen table issues are much more important. The issue of the Mueller probe or of meddling or of alleged collusion, those are things where the partisans on both sides are very firmly in their respective trenches and probably can't be moved from those trenches by anything that is likely to come out.
Well, another issue that both Republicans and Democrats are hoping to capitalize on is the Kavanaugh confirmation. Here's what the president had to say about his comments regarding Christine Blasey Ford.
The way now Justice Kavanaugh was treated has become a big factor in the midterms. Have you seen what's gone on with the polls?
But did you have to...
Well, I think she was treated with great respect. I'll be honest.
But do you think
there are those that think she shouldn't have been?
Do you think you treated her with great respect?
I think so, yeah, I did.
But you seem to be saying that she lied.
You know what? I'm not going to get into it because we won.
So, of course, Kavanaugh has already been sworn in as an associate justice. So will the Supreme Court be enough to keep voters engaged come Election Day?
I think it will, Elaine, because I think it was such a divisive and bitter process to get Justice Kavanaugh confirmed that it has really riled up voters on both sides. One could argue that the Democratic base, Liberal voters, were already fired up because of various events during the Trump presidency. There is certainly a feeling in Republican circles that the Kavanaugh matter has actually made their voters more engaged than they previously were, and Republicans who I speak to say that they're hoping that they can keep that passion running strong among their people, among their base, until November the 6th.
Well, let me ask you, Niall, about recent reporting that you did about the Rust Belt. You write in the midterms, quote, the key question is whether the support that lifted the president to his shock election victory in 2016 will prove transferable to his party's candidates. Talk about the fine line that GOP hopefuls are walking in swing states.
Yeah, it's a really interesting process because most Republican candidates need the Trump voters to turn out for them at the same time as they do not want to alienate more centre-right or moderate voters. And I think there's an interesting parallel here, Elaine, between former President Obama and President Trump. Former President Obama clearly had very strong personal loyalty from his supporters, but in midterms during his tenure, that support did not prove very easily transferable to other Democratic Party candidates. What we don't know is whether President Trump will be able to basically tell his voters to vote for their local Republican candidate. We just don't know whether that's going to be effective or not.
So then are Republicans preparing for the possibility of a blue wave in the House? And if so, how?
They are, I think, bracing themselves for that possibility. Certainly there's a lot more pessimism in Republican circles about the House than there is in the Senate, where, if anything, the tide seems to be shifting in their direction. If Republicans lose the House, what they're bracing for is Democrats having subpoena power, having the power to begin impeachment proceedings against President Trump if they wish to do so, and also block President Trump's legislative agenda. So from that perspective, from where Republicans stand, it's a pretty unappealing vista if Democrats do win the majority in the House.
Let's turn to another topic. Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren released a DNA test Monday in an effort to prove that she has Native American ancestry. Now, the president has repeatedly hit the Massachusetts lawmaker on this. However, this also comes as Senator Warren is gearing up for a 2020 bid. How do her presidential prospects look?
She's clearly one of the strongest candidates and one of the most prominent candidates on the Democratic side. Now, there are going to be a lot of candidates on the Democratic side, it would seem. I mean, a lot of people fancy their chances of beating President Trump. But Elizabeth Warren is clearly someone who is revered on the left of the Democratic Party. And I think this whole story, which was accompanied by a rather slick video from her camp, really underlines the fact that she is going to be running. There's no reason for Elizabeth Warren to do any of these things if she is not pretty seriously contemplating a presidential bid and is, in fact, I would argue, taking the first steps toward a run right now.
Well, finally, a Boston court is hearing an affirmative action case Monday against Harvard University. What's at stake here?
The question is really whether this case extends beyond Harvard. Right now, it's a case that is alleging that affirmative action processes are discriminating against Asian Americans, and that case will be decided however it's decided. The question is, if there is then an appeal, it could ultimately end up in the Supreme Court. That's where there are much grander questions about the whole legality and constitutionality of affirmative action. That won't be decided in this specific case, but it could begin a process that ends at that point.
All right, Niall Stanage in Washington for us. Niall, thank you.
Thanks.